Hello, Shemai, welcome back to Wales in the Movies and Croeso again to the iShed. Today, iShed reviews King Arthur from 2004, directed by Antoine Fuqua and starring Clive Owen, Ioan Gruffudd, Keira Knightley and Stellan Skarsgård. Arise at night! Or something. In the wake of Gladiator, then Lord of the Rings, there seemed to be an influx of sword-wielding, historical and prehistorical epics in Hollywood. Within a few years of the Tolkien trilogy being released, we had films such as Troy, Kingdom of Heaven, Alexander, and of course King Arthur from 2004, all of which were released to very mixed reviews. With the upcoming release of Guy Ritchie's latest take on the legend, King Arthur, Legend of the Sword, or what's more likely to be something like King Arthur, Legend of the Sword, now seems like a very good time to look back at the last Hollywood attempt to bring the once and future king to our screens. It goes without saying, of course, that this review of an old film from back in those days will contain plenty of spoilers, spoilers, spoilers. King Arthur the film starts off with Lancelot as a young boy and an opening narration which tells us of a group of children taken from their families by the Romans to be protectors and knights for the Roman Empire. After a short prologue narrated by our own Ioan Gruffudd, the plot jumps forward 15 years with Arthur, now played by Clive Owen, and his famous knights Lancelot, Bors, Tristan, Galahad and Gawain, expecting to be discharged from their service to Rome after a 15-year commitment. On the day of what should be their liberation, they receive orders from Rome to carry out one final mission, to rescue an important Roman family from north of Hadrian's Wall and bring them back to the safety of the empire. This is billed as a very dangerous mission, as there is a bloodthirsty, villainous Saxon army incoming onto mainland Britain, led by a character whose name is unimportant, but he's played by Stellan Skarsgård. The reluctant acceptance of this mission by Arthur throws him into emotional conflict with his masters in Rome and also with his men who've been dreaming of this day of liberation all their lives. Arthur's doubts about his loyalty are compounded when, on arrival at the estate, he discovers pagans held by the Christian Romans in a tortuous prison camp, including a woad woman named Guinevere, and decides to take not just the Roman family, but also its entire community and its prisoners with them back to save them from the oncoming brutal Saxons.
Arthur, who are all these people?
They're coming with us.
Then we'll never make it.
Come on, get back to work! Back to work!
On their travels, Arthur has many experiences with Lancelot and Guinevere, which throw into doubt his whole life's purpose and his loyalty to the Empire, and even to God, as eventually he realises his true allegiance is to the people and the land of Britain itself. Right, so watching back in 2005 on DVD, I found this movie extremely flat and extremely boring. However, these days on DVD, I do own a copy of the director's cut, which does definitely improve just a little bit on the theatrical release. Let us say, to be fair, that King Arthur has some very good moments and some very good elements. First of all, the photography is rich, colourful and naturalistic. It looks like a really good movie. This works well with most of the sets, locations and indeed the costumes. There are moments of CGI also, which, considering it was back in 2004, blend really well and seamlessly with the daylight natural photography. Also, the movie contains some good performances. Keira Knightley is perfectly decent as the warrior Guinevere in what is a much different take from the previous damsel of the legend. Mads Mikkelsen adds much gravitas as Tristan, but most notably Welshman and Welsh speaker Ioan Gruffudd is superb as Lancelot. This is not Welsh bias. Throughout the whole thing, he imbues his character with a sly, Celtic, sexual charisma, which in many moments saves the movie and its entire premise and enables it to hint just slightly at the famous love triangle between Arthur, Guinevere and Lancelot. Also, the action scenes are for the most part frenetic, exciting and really well directed. Mads Mikkelsen and Ioan Gruffudd look particularly cool with their swordplay. The soundtrack by Hans Zimmer is also top notch, but we're going to touch on that a little bit later. What's not so great about the movie are the many elements which totally compromise its impact. First of all, Clive Owen. Wrong. Just totally wrong. Everything from his face, his voice, to his body language just screams out awkward and inadequate. Sorry. I have no big problem with Owen as a performer, but this role as a man of such passion is just not suited to his acting style or his talents whatsoever.
Oh, merciful God, I have such need of your mercy now.
There are a couple of dialogue scenes which, handled by a more suitable casting choice as Arthur, could have really sold the film's premise and the story's premise, but unfortunately Owen's performance and his delivery of the quite stilted, to be fair, dialogue just goes down like a lead balloon.
My faith is what protects me, Lancelot. Why do you challenge this?
This scene in particular here strikes me. Ioan Gruffudd's Lancelot seems to be calling out not just to Arthur, but to the actor Clive Owen himself, almost as if to be saying, "Clive, give me something to work with here." But Owen just remains inhibited and stilted.
These people need our help. It is our duty to bring them out.
I don't care about your charge, and I don't give a damn about Romans, Britain, or this island. If you desire to spend eternity in this place, Arthur, so be it. But suicide cannot be chosen for another.
And yet you choose death for this
No,
family!
I choose life! And freedom for myself and the men!
When required to be sorrowful, he's stoic. When romantic, he comes across asexual. And when he tries to be fearsome, well, he comes across as about as scary as Ben Stiller's character, Mr. Furious from the movie Mystery Men, only a little bit less convincing.
Pick it up. Pick it up.
The other big problem is the writing. I can kind of see where screenwriter David Franzoni was going with this, but it just doesn't work out in his favour. For now, let's go back to the start of the movie with the narration and the prologue, and we can kind of see from the beginning where it starts to go wrong. So we start off with titles and an opening narrative prologue by Ioan Gruffudd's Lancelot. In the first minute of the narration, we hear about Rome, the Sarmatians, Arabia, and Britannia, and we also get to hear about this.
But no people so important as the powerful Sarmatians to the east. Thousands died in that field. And when the smoke cleared on the fourth day, the only Sarmatian soldiers left alive were members of the decimated but legendary cavalry.
The fourth day? The fourth day of what? What is that? I don't know what he's talking about. We continue.
For the second part of the bargain they struck, indebted not only themselves,
The day has come.
but also their sons, and their sons, and so on, to serve the Empire as knights. I was such a son.
This movie is called King Arthur. It's supposed to be about King Arthur. We got 2 more hours to introduce the character of Lancelot. Why is the opening scene about him? And the whole narration misses a golden opportunity to introduce the main character as Arthur, to set up his backstory and to give a little bit of feeling and to insight into what motivates him. Instead, we get the motivation and the backstory of the supporting character Lancelot. I'll never understand stuff like this. It's not helped when the acting and the dialogue in the opening prologue is as bad and as cheesy as this.
Lancelot!
Then after Lancelot we get one scene with the young boy Arthur here.
Done. We made our way and reported to our Roman commander in Britain, ancestrally named for the first Artorius, or Arthur.
Then as soon as that scene is over, we ride forward 15 years and meet his knights. So let's have a look at this here. Photography, excellent. Costumes, really good. Soundtrack, absolutely epic. But we're 5 minutes into the film and I'm already totally confused and overloaded with settings, characters, and most importantly, themes. What is this story about? I just can't tell you after 4 minutes, and as a result, I just don't care. Now the screenwriter here, like I say, is David Franzoni, the same guy who penned Gladiator with Russell Crowe. It appears as though in many ways King Arthur is trying to recapture the glory of Gladiator. In some ways I appreciate the boldness. For example, the natives that both Arthur and Maximus fight in the beginnings of their respective movies are not the armies who turn out to be the main enemies of the piece. So there's a similarity there right from the beginning. The opening to Gladiator also sees Maximus fighting for her Rome that he will come to doubt through the events of the movie itself.
I've seen much of the rest of the world. It is brutal and cruel and dark. Rome is the light.
It's a magnificent place, Rome. Ordered, civilized, advanced.
The breeding ground of arrogant fools.
The greatest minds in all the lands have come together in one sacred place to help make mankind free.
But here's the difference between the two films. In Gladiator, those events served as a backdrop to the very personal story of Maximus. From its first moments, Gladiator sets up clear characters who have motivations for the events that we see on the screen. The conflict is clear and develops very quickly in the first act of the movie.
The Emperor has been slain.
You care for Maximus because you feel his pain, and more importantly, you feel his fear. Now, Arthur is supposed to feel these things, but the writing and Clive Owen's performance just do not bring it out.
You know nothing of the loss I speak!
Shall I help you remember? An attack on a village. The screams of an innocent woman.
His traumatic backstory, which is shown later on in the film through flashback, has got nothing to do with any of the conflicts we see on screen, particularly the invading Saxon army, who we first see on 35 minutes into the film, so we don't get to see the main villain until nearly 40 minutes in. Arthur's childhood trauma is revealed on about 60 to 70 minutes of the film when he has a meeting with Merlin, who in this movie is a woad and is totally unnecessary to the story that the script and the movie is trying to tell. There's just no need to have Merlin here at all. Gladiator is about the revenge and the redemption of General Maximus, and also Maximus hoping to pass into the afterlife so that he can have a reunion with his wife and his child. Can King Arthur be summed up so simply and so succinctly as that? What's the film about? Historical events need to be the setting for the story, not the story itself. King Arthur, not just this movie but other movies which came before it, seem almost weighed down by the obligatory need to include all the different various elements and characters of its mythology, like for example Merlin here and Lancelot. The best thing is to choose a clear main character or hero or protagonist, and then find a clear villain or antagonist for them to come up against, and hopefully the story can link them in some way that feels natural. Now, what it should be doing is making the hero the sexiest, most charismatic, most respected person in your story. What it should definitely not be doing is by making your supporting character the sexiest, the most charismatic, the most heroic, the coolest character in your story. If you do that, you're going to have to be a very lucky filmmaker to come up with a good action movie. Including too many characters and also importantly too many themes will compromise and dilute your story. These icons need time and space to breathe, and the editing process starts at the writing stage. In screenwriting terms, this is called killing your babies. For example, after marketing the movie as they did as a more historically based story and trying to get back to a kind of Batman Begins style origin tale and to try and be ahead of its time like that, as they were, to be fair, back in 2004, it then totally compromises this by feeling the need to have the obligatory scene where Arthur finds Excalibur and pulls it out of the stone, and all the mysticism and all the baggage that comes with that imagery. Why has that got to be in there? Just like Merlin and the whole wizard imagery and the whole fantasy element, that's supposed to be dropped from this movie. So if that's the case, then drop Merlin and drop Excalibur. You don't need them for this back to basics origin story. Another example is this key exposition scene here when Arthur is given his orders to go up to Hadrian's Wall and collect the family. is delivered in a George Lucas Star Wars type of way, because the film clearly needed to have in it scenes with a round table. Now, at any stage in the previous 10 minutes of this movie, this exposition, this dialogue could have been spoken to inform the audience, but we've just got to have a scene with a round table in because it's an Arthur movie, and it gives Clive Owen nothing to play against other than the flipping round table, and it just makes for another boring scene at a time when the movie should really be gathering lots of pace. If the writers had had the guts to take out the elements of the film, like Lancelot and Merlin and the Sword in the Stone, and just concentrate more on Arthur, they could have given him like what they call a defined goal for the movie, and then given the audience a much bigger sense of ownership over the story and what they're looking for at the end of the movie, which is catharsis. But what the film does do is cut out 95% of any of the magical or fantasy elements from the King Arthur legend.
Love the Welsh.
It kind of makes me think that Arthurian legends are far more suited to TV serial treatment, or maybe a trilogy of movies rather than stand-alone projects. My suspicion, having seen the trailers, is that Guy Ritchie's movie, King Arthur, Legend of the Sword, is going to learn from some of the mistakes of King Arthur, because in the IMDb credits I can't see Lancelot or even Guinevere in the character list, which is I think a good step. But also, having recently watched Charlie Hunnam in The Last City of Zed, my hopes for the main character are, let's say, not sky high. Those facts, plus again the total omission of anything Welsh from the original Welsh Brythonic legend of King Arthur, makes me very sceptical about the upcoming movie. Plus the fact that I can see that David Beckham has also got a cameo in the story. I mean, really. Without wishing to chop off Clive Owen any more than I already have done, I read recently that he was only given the role by the producer Jerry Bruckheimer after Mel Gibson, Russell Crowe and Hugh Jackman all turned it down. I read that producer Jerry Bruckheimer vetoed director Antoine Fuqua's choice of Daniel Craig for King Arthur because he was convinced that Clive Owen was about to become the new James Bond. Ioan Bruckheimer, good skills, Bach. Ioan Gruffudd is in Welsh language film Solomon and Gaynor, which was, I believe, the Academy Award nomination in the UK for the best foreign language film back in 2002. He also, of course, played Reed Richards, aka Mr. Fantastic, in the two Fantastic Four Marvel movies from 2005 and 2007. Now, I really like both those movies quite a lot, but I'm not a fan of the comics, and fair play, most of the fans of the comics absolutely loathe both films, so who am I to argue with them? Notable cameos you may have spotted Ioan Gruffudd in was the officer in Titanic who went back on the lifeboat to rescue Kate Winslet, a lot to answer for there, and also he played the snake Tony Blair in Oliver Stone's biopic W. The film also contains Keira Knightley as a woad-faced warrior Guinevere, very different and more modern than any previous take on the character. She does well. In fact, it is her dialogue with both Arthur and Lancelot that attempts to give the story its meaning and Arthur his goal. I also quite like her in the action scenes. She pulls off an aggressive, feral quality to her fighting, which I think sells quite well the new take on the character. In a Welsh link, she also played Dylan Thomas's girlfriend and love interest in the movie The Edge of Love from back in 2008. Ray Winston is his usual annoying self as Bors. Look, talking of Bors, I've grown totally bored of seeing this guy in Hollywood films. He was fantastic back in the 80s as Will Scarlet in the TV show Robin of Sherwood. In here, he just plays a knight of the round table who takes the tone of the film down to that of a Chelsea football hooligan. I hope Hollywood one day soon realises that casting professional Englishmen like him, and to be fair, Stephen Fry, in Hollywood movies has just got completely boring. The novelty has worn off. I find it very hard to take you seriously and to believe in your character when I can see your face all over football betting adverts at half time during the soccer. Do you know what I mean? Mads Mikkelsen lends a quiet gravitas to Tristan. This was before his really big break in Casino Royale, but he's perfect for this role. You kind of wish he was in it more, but you know, there's already too many characters and too much stuff in this film. Joel Edgerton from New South Wales in Australia, he plays Gawain. If his face is familiar to you, it's because he played Uncle Owen in Revenge of the Sith. Hugh Dancy is Galahad, and you can also see him in Black Hawk Down, TV series Hannibal, and the movie Basic Instinct 2. Stephen Delane is fine as the Woad Gaelic-speaking Merlin, a spiritual leader of what the film calls the Native Britons. You can catch Stephen in films such as The Hours, Spy Game and Zero Dark 30. Swedish actor Stellan Skarsgård is now a decent player in Hollywood. He does just fine in this movie as a reasonably menacing Saxon invader, but his character is underwritten and is just there as a token threat with absolutely no depth or purpose whatsoever. During the course of the film, you may spot plenty of other small-time British character actors that you'd expect to see in a genre such as this, particularly Swansea-born Welsh actor Owen Teale, who is, and the perfect sort of face you'd expect to find in a movie of this genre. So looking at the crew, the director Antoine Fuqua was chosen as director by producer Jerry Bruckheimer. By then he was known for films such as The Replacement Killers and Training Day. He does more or less an excellent job as far as I can see in terms of the shooting of the film, particularly the action scenes and his control over the cinematography. His career after this is a mixed bag, including films such as Shooter, Olympus Has Fallen, The Equalizer and the Magnificent Seven remake. Screenwriter David Franzoni, as well as Gladiator, also wrote Jumpin' Jack Flash and, most interestingly, the film Amistad. It was shot by a Polish director of photography called Sławomir Idziak, am I pronouncing that right? Who has done a great job with photography and also shot films such as Gattaca, Black Hawk Down and Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix. Surely I don't need to tell you who Hans Zimmer is. This is a great soundtrack, very much in the heroic Jerry Goldsmith tradition, and its theme was totally ripped off, incidentally, for the Transformers score later in 2007, as you can hear here. The score here does come across as a little bit hero generic, and I do get the impression that it was written without seeing a final cut or maybe even any of the scenes of the movie. The music just doesn't necessarily seem appropriate to individual sequences, but it's a very good score and probably one of Hans Zimmer's best. I've mentioned most of the Waleslings already, but of course Arthur himself was, as far as any historical connections can show, a Welshman, or from the area of what we now know as Wales. Interestingly, as I kind of hinted at earlier, IMDb states that the language spoken by Merlin and his Woad warriors is a mixture of ancient Gaelic and ancient Welsh, so I'd be very, very grateful if any of the Cymros, any of the Welsh speakers can check out this scene and confirm if they can spot any Welsh in it for me. Here you go. Three stars, Tyre Stellan for King Arthur. If you're going to watch or buy on DVD or Blu-ray, I would go for the director's cut. It pushes the movie to 2 hours and 15 minutes, but it's worth it for a little bit of an improvement to the overall narrative, and therefore your enjoyment. However, despite the movie's claims and the marketing claims, it's not a historically accurate take on the character. Of course, it's impossible to be historically accurate about a film which is set in 300 to 500 AD, where no photography exists, so that's just blarney to even expect that. There's a few interesting links to King Arthur and the Welsh legends on YouTube. Most interesting is a two-part BBC documentary from the 90s directed by Colin Thomas and presented and written by the legendary Welsh historian Gwyn Alf Williams. This, from a Welsh perspective, this documentary will really give you a handle on Wales's links to King Arthur and how we can basically lay rightful claim to it. And of course there are literally dozens of movies and even colour movies set in Arthurian times, maybe as many as 40. Keep your eyes on Wales in the Movies next month for an original documentary whose working title is Mabinogi Movies and Misrepresentation, which is going to comment on the Welsh claims and the Welsh links to the King Arthur legends, as well as giving a retrospective overview of many of the Arthurian movies that have been set in the colour film era. Diolch yn fawr am gwylio. Big thanks for watching Wales in the Movies, iShed Reviews, King Arthur. Now, as well as the upcoming and aforementioned Arthurian documentaries here on Wales in the Movies, the next Wales film we're going to be reviewing is iShed Reviews the Welsh language thriller A Llyfrgell, which in English is called The Library Suicides, directed by Llyn and written by Fflur Dafydd. It's a cracking Welsh language movie set and filmed in the National Library of Wales in Aberystwyth, and I'm very much looking forward to reviewing it. Keep your eyes peeled on the Facebook and the Twitter pages for regular updates as to when iShed Reviews A Llyfrgell is going to be uploaded onto YouTube. Big diolch. Ta-da now. There's much more to come on Wales in the Movies. I shed Welsh reviews, I shed cinema reviews, and I also shed original documentaries. If you appreciate the Wales vibe, check out the channel's other videos, give us a big fat juicy Welsh like, and subscribe to Wales in the Movies. Every click of your mouse helps Wales look bigger. Diolch.